This is Full Coffers with your host, Phil and Toni Buggs from Abundant Harvest Christian Fellowship Ministries.
And this week on Full Coffers, The Journey, Part 17. Well, we left off the last time with two major events happening in our life. One was our son was coming home from, not boot camp, I guess, reception. Mm-hmm. We had gotten a call from the commanding officer, said that your son wasn't quite ready, mature-wise, to go into the service. And another major event was going on is that we were preparing to move to Arizona.
That's right.
So, two things going on. So let's talk about Arizona just for a second.
Arizona.
Arizona. We had mentioned in the last podcast that we went on a family vacation. It was great. We came back to Nashville. Yeah, we like to retire there. And then, as God does, He puts it in both of our spirits. I think you guys are going to go there a little early.
We'll talk about retirement later.
Yeah,
right now, I'm about to upheaval youth. Again.
So here I am. Philip was, like he said, he had his own business started and was doing pretty good. And I was working, but to be perfectly honest, we didn't have a lot of money,
No.
And, I had looked into moving companies. I says, okay, well, we've never done that before. Let's see about moving companies. Those prices were way too high for us, especially our little sticks of furniture we had. Wasn't that much.
That's true. I think our biggest one was we definitely wanted to keep our Explorer.
Yeah, and our living room furniture, because I just got my furniture.
Yeah.
So, we're sitting up here trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? So we had the house up for sale and just trying to figure out how to make this work. And the Holy Spirit, as He normally does, came to my rescue and says, you know what? You're going to get a large U-Haul truck and you're going to attach a trailer and you're going to put your Explorer on that truck and you guys are going to be about your merry way. Now, this wasn't exactly palatable to my husband because, one, he's never driven a U-Haul truck that far, and two, he's never driven a U-Haul truck that far with a trailer with a car on top of it.
No. I had never driven a U-Haul truck that big. Secondly, I had never hauled anything in my life. So, of course...
I said you could do it.
Yes, and of course, she always puts on there, well, God told us. I didn't get the memo.
But I knew you could do it. So we went to the U-Haul lot. Yeah. We picked out the truck that we thought could get our little furniture in there, and we looked at the trailer, and the guy kind of showed Philip what he needed to do. So we're on, we've got that part. But the other part was, where are we going to live?
That's true.
We didn't know anything about Phoenix. We didn't know where to live. We didn't know where the black people at.
God didn't give us that much info. He just said move. And
yes,
so that's what we're doing.
We had to do some research, and we did some research about the population.
We grew up in a predominantly black culture. Even in Detroit, it was primarily black, 70-30%.
Primarily? It was all black, man.
Inside of 8 Mile, it was 99.9999% black. When we moved to Nashville, we did our homework. Mm-hmm. I did my homework and said, okay, we're cutting from 70%. I'll just comfortably say that. Nashville was only 15% black. Still, we managed that, and we found the black people. Mm-hmm. But then we moved out. Coming out to Phoenix, I pulled up the almanac, and, oh, Lord.
4%?
It was like 20% of Nashville. So it's like 3% black.
Exactly.
Oh.
And that was a little scary for me.
Yes, well, me too.
And so we had to figure out, okay, where are we going to live?
Yep.
And not knowing anyone, the internet was still kind of in the early stages, because we're talking 2003. 2003. Yeah. And so we're looking at that situation. So what I did was I got on the internet and I Googled African American realtors in Phoenix, Arizona.
And just as God would have it, there literally was
a black man that picked up
a listing for African American Realty.
That was the name of the company. If you can believe that. But I'm telling you the truth. And I found this gentleman that was our realtor, and I called him up and I said, "You're not going to believe this, but I just Googled African American realtors in Phoenix, Arizona, and guess what? You popped up." And so we began to have the conversation
Right.
about, where we wanted to live. I honestly didn't think, and I'll be very honest with this, I didn't think we had really, our credit wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. We came a long way, but it still wasn't where I thought it should be to purchase a home. My intention of calling him was just to say, hey, where can we live? Where can we rent a house, or, something temporary until we can figure out what we wanted to do.
If I chime just for a second,
Yeah.
because the house that we ended up selling in Nashville, it was like 1,100 square feet, I think
If
it was.
that,
If
yeah.
that. And the market at that time, if I say the house was 99, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So we put our budget at around 105 that we could
Comfortably afford if
comfortably.
we could qualify
Yeah, if we
for a
could-
mortgage.
Yeah, for a mortgage, 105. So
Yeah.
that's where we're at. Yep.
So, we talked and we talked on and off, and I kind of told him what our date was in terms of coming out there, and he said, "Hey, as soon as you get into town, let us know what you want to do, and come on by." I says, "Okay, no problem." So we are in the process. We're talking, late September, where we're really kind of revving up the move process. Now, granted, Philip did have his own company, and the goal was he was going to continue, because having his own company, he can kind of move it,
Yeah.
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 I was the one that was losing the stable income. So I'm trying to apply for paralegal positions in Arizona, every law firm. And in fact, prior to us moving out there on purpose, finally, my thoughts are going. We did go out like over the Labor Day weekend. And I had probably, I don't know, 8 interviews lined up within a 2-day period. We kind of took a quick trip out here to Arizona, and I got interviews set up, and Philip was just kind of pretty much the chauffeur.
Yeah.
He just took me from interview to interview, and, I'm hoping that at some point someone will call me. But nothing really came about. And I think I need to revamp a little bit what I was saying about the realtor. When we decided to come out first, before we did that final move, we did meet with the realtor, and he was kind of showing us around Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Philip had said we were looking at a budget, maybe about 105, maybe 110, depending upon, my potential income. And so the realtor was taking us around and showing us around and everything. And then we started looking at new build homes.
Now, why in the world would we even consider new build, considering or looking at our credit situation?
Yeah, I said, this man is crazy. It's
Exactly.
like, you're
Yep.
going in the wrong direction, man. I said, this. And so he took us in, and mind you, new builds was around Nashville, and I kind of liked new builds homes and things like that. But again, credit wasn't there. And so when we came out here, I said, if we qualify, it's going to be something hardly no more than like 110, 105. He took us to this new build subdivision. We walked into the model, and I thought I walked into the Taj Mahal.
This thing was drop dead gorgeous. But you got to consider, you're talking about at that time, we were just moving up from the east side.
Yeah. Jefferson's.
We still poor. We ain't even affording the O and the R. We maybe might be getting there with what we sold the house for in Nashville. But all that said, for us to even be considering remotely any new build was a pipe
That was out of the
dream.
question.
Yeah.
I
So it's
wanted,
like, why is he taking us here?
Yeah, I would have been settled, take me to the ghetto, I'll buy a little house, and, put bars on the window and keep it moving. And so,
We could afford that.
Yeah. But we go in this house,
Yep.
and yes, it was
It was.
beautiful.
Yes, it
And,
was.
I'm thinking, come on, man, because, for those of you, do you know how it feels when you apply for credit and, you hoping against hope that maybe that'll go through. And then when they come back and tell you, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Your face cracked, you're trying to save face and walk out of there. So
that is us.
My expectation was this is not going to end well. And I was getting a little peeved with our realtor about this.
Now, while Tony's in her feelings, God must have done just a Jedi mind trick on me, because I was talking to the salesman like, okay, hey, how much is this?
I'm like, bruh, are you crazy? Because we're talking starting $183,000.
I didn't even, when he said, I said, well, what's the base model? I mean, what are we talking about? He said 185. I says, and then something or somebody jumped at me and said, oh, that's not bad.
I looked at him like, are you crazy?
I said 180. Oh, that's not bad. And so something is in me just talking through me.
Yeah, he was talking all right.
Because Philip knew that was impossible. So anyway, yeah.
We get in the office, and I'm like, I know how this is going to end. And he said, okay, let's go ahead and because honestly, the model was what I wanted. If I were to have anything, that would be what I want. And we go in the office, and I've been through this before. We sit in them two little chairs. They offer you water. Yep. And I'm like, can we just get this pain? Can I get my pain over with now? So we fill out the application. And remember, folks, I ain't got no job.
I'm working on, and as she says, the stable income. It's stable income because my business is basically commission. Yeah. So I basically, when I am hired, most customers, they pay me right on the spot, and there's very few that don't. But the reason why I'm bringing that out is that there was no consistent income, but God had been supplying our needs all the way up to this point. Mm-hmm. So when we needed it, God would give me a job, and it would be more than enough or just enough for what we need. So that's the context or the qualification or behind what we say in terms of steady income from what we saw. But God is in this all the way. Anytime he jumps into me and says 185 ain't bad, and I'm looking at, okay, I can afford 85. Where'd that one come from? Mm-hmm. But that is how God is working in this situation.
And so, so we start the application process, and, we're going along, assets and all this other stuff. And I said, yep. And then we get down to the point of down payment. Not necessarily down payment, deposit, because you have to have the escrow deposit in order to even start the process of that.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that 185 was base.
Yeah, that didn't include the good stuff. By the time
we got through, we're in a dream now because we're adding all of these things in.
And that's the thing about it, is that we had to go to what they call their design house.
Yes.
And select colors and palettes and flooring. I'm from Detroit, y'all. I ain't have a clue what this stuff. This man had us zipping around in between my interviews. Philip was calling me like, what kind of color do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, literally, it was chaos. It was chaos.
But it was still a dream to us because I'm just waiting for when he says, well, this didn't go through. And then Tony and I would just take our little pennies and go back. But it never happened.
And to put a little, something in the pot here, when I talked about that earnest money you have to put down, normally you put down at least 10%
of the
total price,
which was around $240.
Yeah,
it had jumped up from 185 to 240.
So we're talking thousands of dollars, of which we didn't even have $1,000 in the bank to move. So I said, okay, in my mind, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to squash this real quick. The only thing, sir, that we can put down today is $100. And so I'm waiting for...
Of course. We're waiting for, no, that ain't going to work. Why in the world did God jump into that guy and say...
Well, when can you get that to me? And I said, huh?
At every point we're trying to kill the deal, God is saying, no, no. And so we say, we're going to go ahead.
We're going to go to the gas station on the
Yep.
corner
And get
because, he needed a certified check or something. And it was like on a Saturday afternoon. Banks were closed. And so I said, Philip, I can't believe we're going to a Circle K and we're going to get a $100 money order for 50 cents. And we're going to take it back to this guy. But we did. Now,
Yes.
before we went up there, we got the money order, and there's this mountain that is open to the public. In fact, if you drive up this mountain, it's about 5 miles up, but it's in a kind of circular.
Yeah, so it's not literally vertically 5 miles, but
So we get up there because we said, we need to do something. Yeah. And so we said, you know what, let's just pray about this whole thing because things were just coming at us way too fast. And so we went to the top of the mountain to pray for clarity, to pray for wisdom. And Lord, if this is to be, then make it so.
Make it so. That literally was our prayer. That, Lord, close the door if we're not supposed to do this. Now, this is not pie in the sky, click my heels, we're wearing red ruby slippers. This has to do with faith and obedience. And while I'm sharing that in not so much a loose context, but in our journey, this is what God had told us to do. So we don't share this story as a model to follow. The only part to model and follow is whatever it is, make sure that God is in the plan and you're listening to him. Well, how do you know it's God? That's a whole different segment. But we had been walking with God for literally decades by this point. So understanding when God is in something and when he isn't, we had pretty good channels of connection. And so when we saw all these doors opening and we're saying, Lord, is this you? So it's one of those things of more so confirmation that it is him. And he had yet to give us the confirmation, which was amazing the way he did. So we got the $100 money order.
We came down from the mountaintop. Moses.
But our hair wasn't gray yet. That was coming.
We deliver this little $100 money order to this guy, and he says, okay, great. So Philip and I toddle back to Nashville. We begin assembling or disassembling our home. We get this truck and pack everything in it. In fact, the truck was almost too small.
Was almost,
because I was going cheap, so I figured,
we didn't know nothing else but cheap.
So we're going to make it work, and we stuck it in there. Got the trailer on. Our next door neighbor came over, helped us hook our Explorer up to it.
Yeah, and
we were ready to roll. Now, during that time, again, I went on several interviews and nothing bit. The day before we were leaving, I got a phone call from a law firm that I had applied to recently and had not interviewed. And they said, we'd like to interview you for a position. And they asked me when would I be there. I says, well, we're leaving in the morning. And I should be ready for an interview on Tuesday. So here we are. I had no job, getting ready to build a house, and this call comes in literally the day before. If that call had came in a day later, our phone would have been shut off by then. There would be no communication whatsoever.
Door
opening. So we're getting all this done. Now, to bring back our son had arrived home, like a week earlier, and we went down to the bus station and we picked him up. It was dark, and, he got off the bus, and I could tell right away there was something different about Philip. It almost as if he came with a chip on his shoulder. Now, that's plausible because here he was getting ready to go into a military career, and within 2 weeks of being there, he got discharged because he wasn't ready mentally or mature-wise. So maybe there was a hint of embarrassment. Maybe he was ashamed. But he came with a chip on his shoulder. But, be either here or there, we had him come back to the house. But he knew Kyle had an apartment. So what did he do the first night back? he went to Kyle's place. Now,
Yep.
I'm pretty sure, knowing my son, Philip probably threw back a few because he was just, and understandably, not so much throwing back a few, but he was upset maybe with himself,
Yeah.
angry that he had to come back. And because he's coming back to his parents, leaving literally in a week.
And in his mind, as we would learn later on, he felt that that was abandonment.
Yeah.
And to us, and again, we're sharing these things, having full knowledge now of why things happen. But at the time, Toni and I were committed to what we were going to be doing, and our children would just have to make it the best way they can because we'd done our job in our mind.
Yeah, we left Kyle with her own place, working full time.
Yes.
Philip was supposed to be in the military, getting, but it didn't happen that way.
Yes, but it wasn't like they could not, in our minds, they could not take care of themselves. They knew how to work. They knew how to get a job. They knew how to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So the way we viewed it was that they would work together. Boy, was that something. But that's another story.
Yes.
They would work together. And in fact, a clue to that was the fact that he did. When he came home, he didn't want to stay with us.
No, he wanted to go to Kyle, and they had agreed that he would move in with her because, remember, she had a 2-bedroom.
Yes.
Or she had a 1-bedroom initially, and then I think she got a 2-bedroom within the same complex.
Exactly.
So they were going to live together and live life, and Philip and I continue our journey to Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah. If I put one more caveat in there, it wasn't like Philip and Kyle were at odds with each other. In fact, if they weren't fighting each other, they were
loving on each other.
Yeah,
so it's
yeah.
a love-hate relationship. It's any sibling kind of thing.
So they got along well, which is why Kyle at first said, hey, it's no problem. He can stay with me. We'll work it out.
Yeah, And so that was a relief. That was a relief.
Yes.
But there was an incident the day before we were going to move. We had asked both of them to come down to help us because, it was a lot. And so, Philip and Kyle did. We were dismantling our dining room table. And Philip and I, my son, was in the kitchen. We were, again, there was something just not quite right with him.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like he had an attitude, not wanting to be there to help us. And after a while, I just got tired. It's like, boy, what's wrong with you?
And to again to bring in the listening audience, you're probably saying, well, yeah, he would be normally like this. But again, in Toni and my mind, the way we raised our kids, it was one of those, you chip in, you do what you have to do. And you can talk about your feelings and deal with them later on, but there's something that we have to do and we need your help. And the expectation is for you to help.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no reason to think any differently because all through our lives and what we'd seen growing up, I might be mad as ever at my mother and father, but if they told me to do something,
you got to do it.
You do it.
Exactly.
So
and that's how I was feeling.
Yeah.
But he didn't seem to get the memo.
No. And then it started, and so please continue at the kitchen table because this is something, you talk about that crystal stair breaking. I mean, steps started to literally disappear with this incident that happened here because it completely took Toni and I back.
Yeah.
We'd never been in this situation before.
And I'll be truthful, I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was more so he wasn't doing what he needed to do to help us. And I called him out on that.
Yeah.
And he had a choice word for me. I mean, he wasn't cussing or anything like that, but he basically says, I don't feel like doing this.
And at that point, I just felt the world had just stood still.
Now, I had a leg of my dining room table in my hand, and I was going to find an appropriate place to put it.
Because it was completely out of character, at least the way we were thinking. But unbeknownst to us, there was something happening inside our son that we had no clue about. But at that moment, Papa Bugs had literally, and I had shared this with my son years earlier, because Phil is bigger than me, taller than me. And I told Phil, well, his mother told him, well, I can drown you with a teaspoon of water.
I just said a teaspoon of full water take care of all that. sleeping kid, teaspoon of water, take care
Problem
of it.
solved. Oh, goodness.
I'm not a big good parent.
No. But what was it? But I shared with my son, I shared it then. I had to bring it to his remembrance. I said, son, don't get it twisted. I said, your mother was my wife before she was your mother. And I protect my wife. So don't even think about it'd be better for you to raise up on me than your mother, because it is not going to end well. But even with that, he eventually backed down and left, but Toni and I were left with, what in the world was that?
We were perplexed.
Completely perplexed.
But unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time.
No.
Because we had to get on the road the next day.
Agreed.
And so early the next morning,
Yep.
we got up, we got in that van. Now, I must admit, and I must love you guys out there in podcast land, because I'm getting ready to share something with you. Normal people probably wouldn't, but I'm not normal. I woke up the next morning, and I think it was because I was doing a lot of lifting, but Toni had a hemorrhoid. And I'm sitting here thinking, I got to travel for 2 days. I didn't have no pillow to sit on.
In a U-Haul truck.
In a U-Haul where you got to sit straight up, and those seats were hard. You're talking about torture.
Yes.
And that's why we're going to entitle this episode Highways and Hemorrhoids. Need I say more?
Oh, Lord.
But we got on the road that morning. It was foggy. It was raining.
Yes.
And again, we are not only driving a truck, but we are driving a trailer with a car on top of it, which we have never done before.
See, I love the way that my wife switches from English to French.
Yeah,
we didn't drive that trailer. I drove that trailer, and I had and during the course of it, and I know fellas that are listening to this that most of you have probably pulled something before, but one of the key rules that you follow is you don't look in the rear mirror to make sure that something is following you. You always look forward because it's going to follow you. Well, it took me a while to figure that out because all during that trip, down through Ohio and through Oklahoma as we were coming.
We didn't go to Ohio. Where are you going?
I always think of Ohio because we went from Detroit to Nashville. But no, it was Nashville to Phoenix. And they had a lot of construction in Oklahoma. So as we were driving through Oklahoma, there was literally 10, 15 miles construction. And this wasn't just straight highway. We're talking going through the cities with cones that you have to maneuver around. On top of that, we have to get gas. So now I've got to think, how do I drive this trailer with this U-Haul truck through a gas station without backing up? So, all of these things I'm learning for the first time. So this is, my wife is dealing with her hemorrhoid, and I'm dealing with trying to guide us from Nashville to Phoenix without dying. What literally takes 24 hours straight through of driving, it took us 3 days.
3 days.
3 days
sitting
to get
on a hemorrhoid. But anywho, we want to continue this story because we have just gotten to the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more that we want to share with you in our journey from Nashville to Phoenix, Arizona in 2003.
And we're going to entitle it Highways and Hemorrhoids Part 2.
Have a great time, folks.
Yes, have a great rest of your week. This episode was produced and edited by Miss K. Simone. Cover graphics by Indefinite. Music by Miss K. Simone. So until next time, I'm Phil Bugs.
And I'm Toni Bugs.
Wishing you a wonderful week.